Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2018-2019 Board of Aldermen budget deliberations. Today is May 9th, 2018, and today we are here for the departmental presentation portion of the aldermanic budget process. But before we begin, will everyone please rise and salute our flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Alderman Anderson.
Present.
Alderman Beatty. Alderman Fortunati. Alderman Gaynor. Alderman Gurman. Alderman Gennatasio. Alderman Golden.
Alderman Golden would like to get excused, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Grant. Alderman Hardiman.
Alderman Hardiman would like to get excused as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Smith. Thank you. Oh, no. Alderman Sutton.
Present.
Alderman Tranquilli. Alderman Beccarelli. Here. Alderman Vitro.
Here.
Alderman Vitale. 12 present, Mr. Chairman.
We have 12 present. We have a quorum. At this point, the first department organization on our agenda is the educational operations. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Ready?
You could do your presentation
Jump in.
at any time.
Okay. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening regarding the Board of Education's proposed budget for the 2018-19 school year. I have some opening remarks before turning the presentation over to Dr. Fieser and the administrative staff. So this year's budget request, as adopted by the Board of Education, reflects a 1.786% increase over the current budget. This increase is slightly higher than what you've seen in recent years, in part because the enrollment decline is beginning to lessen, while contractual increases continue to rise. The board recognizes that the superintendent's proposal was developed with great sensitivity to our taxpayers and awareness of the financial challenges faced by the state, and that concern carried through to our own budget deliberations. The board fully supports Dr. Fieser's funding requests. After careful review during our budget workshops, we did unanimously adopt her budget with two changes. First, recognizing that our buildings are old, with some showing their age more than others, we increased account number 4304 for buildings projects by $361,500. This will allow each building principal's first and second priorities to be addressed, whereas the superintendent's proposal funded only the first priority. The board thinks it's important that we tackle more of these smaller projects on a yearly basis in an effort to better the learning environment in each school. The board also made a $4,000 increase to account 8201 student athletics, so the girls' hockey players will pay the same fee to play on the Notre Dame Fairfield co-op team as the boys currently pay to play on the Milford co-op team, which is $200 per player. Some of you may recall several years ago we began to phase in a decrease in the pay-to-play fee for the boys' team. Dr. Fieser's funding request suggested a similar phase-in, but this board felt since the amount needed to fully equalize the girls' and the boys' contribution was relatively small, we wanted to see it happen all at once. So we made a small offsetting adjustment to another line to balance this out. Dr. Fieser's original funding request also contained the board's shared cost to add one additional school resource officer to the middle school coverage. We have asked for this position year after year because we continue to see it as an important role in our schools, and it is our hope this will be funded in some manner this year on the city side as well. Dr. Fieser will address the remaining funding requests and reductions found in this budget, but before I close, I want to reiterate the board's firm belief that our proposal reflects the needs of the district as we move forward as a school community under the leadership of a new superintendent, to sustain and strengthen the good work Dr. Fieser has led during her tenure. It is our desire to foster the district's growth by providing for student learning that is engaging and relative to today's times, and by supporting our exceptional staff members with appropriate professional development opportunities in a positive working environment. We continue to see amazing initiative in what teachers and other staff members offer our students and what the students in turn produce. The city has been, to address the board's increase in Dr. Fieser's funding, initial funding request for buildings projects, we want to acknowledge the city has been very generous with its capital improvement allocations for our schools, and you have all been very supportive of the district. But as was pointed out by a parent during the public hearing, we do not renovate as new, which leaves what I will call the sprucing up expenditures to the board's annual operating budget. It's easy to say these items can be put off until next year, and some can, but the question really is, should they? There is no guarantee they will be done next year or the year after, because quite simply, it's likely more urgent needs will arise that will take a greater priority. As the board works on the superintendent search, we hear over and over again that Milford is well regarded and a desirable school district to live and work in. You've done an incredible job maintaining our infrastructure within the city, and in my opinion, Milford has never looked better, and folks are taking notice. Investment in our schools has the same effect, attracting young families who will be invested in our community. It is my hope that you share our commitment to place a high value on the education of our children with support of both teaching and learning and our school infrastructure. I also hope you will recognize the board's pledge to bring before you a budget that truly addresses our needs. So I'll turn the presentation over now to administration, who will share more details with you, and then we can answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Glennon. Good evening, members of the Board of Aldermen. So I'm not going to reiterate everything that Mrs. Glennon said with respect to the support that has been provided to us by the city, but what I will just say is that in my 7 years here, the city, you particularly, the Board of Aldermen and the mayor, have been enormously supportive, and it's enabled us, I believe, to improve dramatically the school system, both by adding new programs, but also with respect to existing programs, really strengthening them and deepening them. And I believe that as a result, our students are engaged in far better learning, and also our students have more options in their studies as they move up through the grades. And again, that's a result of your support. So I want to publicly thank you. As you know, I'm leaving, but I want you to know I feel terrific about the state of the school system, knowing that people really are taking note of Milford. So thank you. And I'm going to begin taking you through this budget, the requests, as well as the savings, the sheets that you have. This is a synthesis of what we are asking for. The details of this, first of all, are in my letter, which is right after Mrs. Glennon's letter in the budget at the beginning of the budget book. But obviously the details are then line item by line item. So let me start with the major budget requests, and quite honestly, we don't believe that these are many. We broke them into 3 categories: student learning, security and climate, and facilities/other. So I'll begin with the student learning. We are asking for a 1.0 full-time equivalent teacher of world language to expand the world language program into the 6th grade. It does not exist in 6th grade right now. What we anticipate is that we would enable 6th graders to take French for 1 trimester and Spanish for another trimester. These periods that students engage in these languages would involve an introduction to the basic language and culture of the particular language itself, French or Spanish, basic vocabulary, oral and written expression. And it would give students a taste for world language, and then moving into 7th and 8th grade, they would be able to choose, and they would have then go into a full year of study, both in 7th and 8th grade. The cost of that is $60,000. We also are requesting support for a civic global engagement pathway. Let me just say at the outset, there's no increased cost to this. This pathway was actually created by the State Department of Education, and all superintendents were notified of it. We took a look at it. We also brought it to the board, and all of us were very excited about what this pathway is going to enable our students to do. It's what's called a global engagement pathway, and you'll understand a little bit why. But let me just say that at the end of the pathway, for those students who complete it, they will receive a global engagement certificate that would be part of their transcript. So it would really distinguish them as they apply for college or other pursuits. What is required is that students have to take 7 credits in globally focused courses, and the good news is we have more than 7 courses at the high school that are globally focused. They also have to engage in an extracurricular activity that has some kind of a global focus, and they have to complete a global service actual project before they graduate. So the requirements are pretty rigorous in order to receive this certificate. But interestingly enough, the board just approved it, I think maybe in January. We already have students in the senior class who are asking, could they be considered for this? And we, obviously we have to get approval from the state, but there's a real interest at the high school. The third request is curriculum writing. We have new standards in science as well as social studies. So the next generation science standards have been adopted by the State Department of Education, and it is going to dramatically change how science instruction is taught and how it is learned by students. It's a much more inquiry-based. It is not at all the way science, the way most of us would have learned science, where it was pretty formulaic, or a recipe that you followed in labs, et cetera. It's much more engaging in what they call phenomena, where kids might be examining something and have to draw their own conclusions by what they think is happening or predict what may be happening, et cetera, without necessarily there being a right answer. So it's very, very different with respect to the kind of learning. So a lot of curriculum work is going to be done in science, and also the National Social Studies standards have been adopted, and that's going to also affect some significant change in curriculum. We're not going to get all of the curriculum work finished this summer, but a fair amount will be completed. So we're asking for $75,000 for that initiative. We're also restructuring the enrichment program at the elementary schools. We have students in grades 4 and 5 who are in enrichment. Because of the declining enrollment in each of the schools, the numbers are pretty small, and we felt that it would really be valuable if we could bring kids together. So the goal is to bring from 4 of the schools, the 5th graders together at one site, and they would be transported to one central location for their learning tied to enrichment, and then the other 4 schools that would go to another site, and that would be for 4th and 5th graders. So the request for $22,700 plus is really for transportation, to pick the kids up at their home school, bring them to the central site, and then 3/4 of the way through the day to be able to pick them up again and bring them back to their home site. And that would occur once a week. And again, this is the enrichment program for kids who have been identified as gifted. Under security and climate, as indicated by Mrs. Glennon, we are asking for the additional school resource officer. Just to refresh your memory, we currently have 4 resource officers, 1 at each of the high schools and 2 that are shared among the 3 middle schools as well as the academy. And so this would give 3 at the middle schools, with one of those giving maybe the equivalent of a day at the academy. So it would be much, much better with respect to the services. And The role of the school resource officer and the contribution that they make in our schools is simply invaluable, and I don't think you'd find a person in the school system that would tell you otherwise. We're also asking for, and that $40,000, excuse me, would be the board's share of the cost of the SRO. We have a lot of security, once again, thanks to grants that have been supported by the mayor, and also through you, through our budgets. Our security in our schools is far, far more advanced than in many, many, many other districts. But the amount of security that we have need continual upgrades. So the $27,000 is for maintaining as well as upgrading a lot of the security that we have in place. And lastly, with respect to our facilities/other category, we are requesting a 0.5, which is half-time custodian at West Shore Middle School, and this is because of the increase in the square footage. We did the same thing with East Shore Middle School when it had gone through its renovation, so this is equivalent. We are also asking for what is called an asset management system. If you do have questions on this, Mr. Bradbury is here, but in a nutshell, let me just suggest to you that the amount of equipment that we have in this school system, as well as telephones, printers, file cabinets, desks and chairs, computers, etc., is thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces. The reality is inventorying these items is impossible without more staff. We're not asking for more staff. What we're asking for is to be able to purchase a system that would enable systematizing literally all that is owned by the Milford Public Schools and being able to put them on a calendar where we could then be proactive with, okay, this boiler has 2 more years remaining, a lifetime, where this one has 5 years, et cetera, and be able to do far better planning with respect to replacement instead of doing, what sometimes happened is we get caught off guard, something breaks down, and then you have to find the money to repair it, et cetera. And again, if you want to hear more detail about that, Mr. Bradbury can speak to that, but the cost that of this would be approximately $77,000. Again, this is a management system that would be purchased, and we believe it would be enormously helpful to the school system, and that in the long run would actually yield some savings. The building projects, I believe you know about that. In what was proposed when we brought the budget forward, every principal in the district is asked to give a list of their first and second building project that they would like pursued. We took a look at those. Mr. Bradbury prioritized them, and one project was originally given approval for inclusion in the budget. The Board of Ed requested and approved adding the second request from the principals for a building project. And they range in category depending upon the building, but they're all legitimate requests. So as a result, what we're asking for now is $379,600 for the building projects. And the girls' hockey, I won't go into it, but Mrs. Glennon explained that. This equalizes the costs between the boys and the girls who play hockey in the school system. The $8,800 is the difference between last year's budget and then what is the proposed budget, what is needed. Do you want me to pause here for questions or continue with the savings?
Why don't you pause right now,
Okay.
and you could ask questions up to what you have presented to this time. Otherwise, they're going to forget some of the questions that are generated from your presentation. Is there any questions for the staff? Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for a job well done. As far as the budget is concerned, you had mentioned that you prioritized some of the building projects. Can you tell, I don't see it in the budget. Is it in the budget? Did I overlook it?
It's in our budget book.
Right.
It's in
Can
one
you
of
just give some example of projects that principals from individual schools have asked for, I guess, building and grounds improvement and whatever it takes?
Sure. Might have Mr. Riccitelli speak to this?
Sure. I'll refer you in the budget package to the appendix section in the back, and it is in Appendix I, which is on page A22. I'm sorry. Yes, Appendix I, and starts on page 821. So we have listed there each of the projects. For each school, the first item that's listed was the number one priority, as set by the building principal in coordination with Mr. Bradbury, the facilities director. And then the second item that's listed for each school is priority 2. So the priority 2 items are the ones that the Board of Education added in total, $361,500.
Thank you.
You can see the breadth of the items that were requested, or the projects, I should say.
Dr. Feaser, the, under security enhancements, the $27,000, are these enhancements, are these mandated, are these under the listing of mandates from the state? I'm sorry.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. That dollar amount is over and above what we requested last year, and specifically, that $27,000, there's really two things that it would be for. One is we increased the number of quick link buttons that we have in our school system. Basically, it's a panic button. The first round of security money that came through, we put 1 or 2 panic buttons, or quick link buttons as we call them, in each of the schools. And since then, we increased the number. We put them in the common areas like the cafeterias, the auditoriums, things like that. And there's an additional cost for the maintenance of that system and the monitoring of that system because of the additional quick link. So that's a piece of it. The second piece of it that I'll just touch on very briefly, there is a package that we wish to purchase, which will allow us to monitor social media for things that may be of threat to Milford Public Schools or the surrounding community. There's a tremendous amount of technology available now for security, and we've identified, through our security coordinator is Jeff Nielsen, who's a former Milford police officer, retired Milford police officer, who's our security coordinator, and through the security working group, they've identified an app, or not an app, but a system that is able to monitor social media for potential threats, so that we'd be able to detect these kinds of things before they become actual threats. So without getting into great detail, we don't want to give the bad guys the whole story, but that's what we would purchase also with that $27,000.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for clarifying that up, because I know there was some mandates from the state. A lot of schools have to be brought up to date, and this is over and above the required.
Your board approved $1 million in security infrastructure enhancement dollars through the capital improvement plan, and those are that also is going for the state mandates that we what they call harden the vestibules, or create isolated ballistic proof vestibules. So that money is ongoing through your capital improvement plan, but this is in our operating budget.
Thank you again. Alderman Giannattasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Good evening. Under facilities, I believe this question will be directed towards Mr. Bradbury, the asset management system. I have a question. Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Bradbury, first, can you share with us basically the concept behind this as far as how it works? I'm not really familiar with this type of system.
What my plan is our goal here is, if you break down our school system, and we'll talk about just our HVAC equipment, our heating and cooling. We have about $10 million worth of equipment that resides in the buildings. Rooftops, exhaust fans, pumps, transformers, electrical panels. What I'm hoping to do, my plan is to be able to categorize all this and be able to lay this out in a better capital improvement plan. Because what's going to happen is all this equipment is going to fail. And I want to be able to lay this out in a manner that the city knows when it's coming and we know when it's coming. It's a huge undertaking to get this on a sheet, and then that will combine into our work order system. So the PMs will generate off this. The biggest piece of this is the data collection. The yearly service is really minimal. It's the first piece is to get 2/3 of the square footage into this system so we have it. The buildings we're building now, the equipment that we're getting, you're not getting 50 years worth of life out of the equipment that we're getting. It's not like when we built Live Oaks back in the 60s. We don't get the life out of that equipment anymore. It doesn't last 15, 20 years if we're lucky.
Okay, so just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, so this is more or less for mechanicals on buildings?
That's one piece of it. We'll be able to put everything else anything that we're gonna have to replace down the line, window blinds, computer desks, all that stuff we wanna get in, classroom furniture. We wanna
Okay.
get it on a rotation, so we're not blindsided by it.
So you're going to take an inventory and you're going to upload the system, and then from that point, what does the system do for you? Like, it just,
The only thing
what is it?
The biggest thing it'll do for us is, one, it'll generate our preventive maintenance program. It'll help us with that on the high-end equipment. And two, it'll give us a replacement cost and to generate that as years go out, so we can flatten that line out. Does that make?
Yeah, and then I guess periodically you're going to upload information when a unit is serviced, and you're going to know.
That goes into, yes, our work order system, but what'll really tie into is when equipment is added, such as West Shore Middle School, that'll all get added to the system, and it'll have a year-end date on how long the life expectancy of that equipment.
Okay, and then as far as other equipment that you mentioned, like desks, chairs, is it just going to be simply the date of purchase?
Most of that will be a date of purchase and value, so we can have
And
some
value.
sort of budget process to pull it out of the system.
And right now, how are you dealing with this? Literally, is it just boxes of files?
No, I have a work order system that generates a lot of our work, that we know where the equipment is. We have some of it we've been building the PM program as we go, as we service. This is gonna get everything in it, everything that we've missed. There's pumps, there's steam traps, there's stuff in rooms that nobody even knows about that we're trying to get on there.
And just one more question. What other school districts are currently using this type of
This
system?
is the system we have is nationwide. It's Dude Solutions. That's the company that's helping me with this, but they're nationwide across the board. I can get examples for you if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and to you, Mr. Bradbury, through him. I have a question. It sounds like a great idea, asset management, but it's silo for the Board of Ed. Are there any towns and cities that are doing it to help with purchasing, stagger the sunset date so you would know when you were purchasing, but do it for the whole city so that there would be an asset management system and a person to gather the data, enter the data, and then use it for all? Trucks, public works, I mean, it comes up in every budget hearing for all departments.
It does
And
come-
what's the benefit to you to spend $77,000 just for the silo Board of Ed?
Well, yes, you can run it across the board, This system, you
I can't
wouldn't
hear
run
you.
across, you wouldn't run this system across the board. You'd have to have a separate,
Licensing, yeah.
not so much a license, but a separate entity with Public Works. But you could absolutely run the same system. I believe they have a system that collects all that data and they have it on record.
I really meant, is there any advantage to keeping them silo or to do it across? And do you know of any other towns that are to benchmark that do it across department systems?
There's nobody in my group of the Connecticut Building and Ground Association that does it across Board of Ed to towns, that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Pat, while we're on the subject, years ago, we as far as equipment is concerned, equipment in schools, years ago, we added barcodes on all of the equipment, all the desks, computers. Is that going to be of any help to you? Because we had to keep, at one point, we had to keep an inventory, a school inventory of running.
We'll still be using that system. We're still using it now. So how it integrates with the larger piece, we'll still use that as a, when we get rid of equipment, we still use that piece.
Okay, just to follow up, going back to buildings and ground projects, I see in a lot of the building and grounds projects that, I guess, a few years back was a lot of involvement, parent involvement, PTA involvement. Is that not the case today, where we're getting parents to help with gardens and landscaping and PTA projects? Because I know that was a big piece of it years ago when parents got involved and we had, those funds through PTA to supplement what we needed to do as building principals to our grounds and buildings.
We do some cooperation with the PTAs, but it's different things. We're getting into some buddy benches, some basketball hoops, but they're really not doing any physical work besides maybe some cleanup party or something like that alone.
Oh, that's a big difference because we did a lot of physical work years ago, and just to add mulch and renovate beds,
Right.
renovate front gardens, that almost seemed like part and parcel of PTA projects and beautification projects for the school.
Correct.
So that's too bad. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions so far for the educational operations? Alderman Giannattasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Under the proposed custodian, you said .5. Is that just a matter of giving out more hours to the existing custodians, or is that have to be a new hire?
At the present time, we have a half-time custodian there now. We would just increase that to a full-time custodian.
Okay, just increase that person's hours?
Correct.
Okay.
That position will go from half to full-time.
All right, understood. Mr. Chairman, through you, I do have a question under student learning. The curriculum writing was mentioned that it's a new standard initiative. I guess my question is, would that be considered an unfunded mandate, or is that something that we're voluntarily doing?
Well, let me just say that Connecticut doesn't produce curriculum. They'll produce standards, frameworks sometimes, but the curriculum is developed at the local level by every district across the state. So it's not an unfunded mandate, to be honest with you. It's the state, adopts a new set of standards, and the expectation is that then the districts would change their curriculum.
So we're going to follow with the new requests? Okay, but it does increase. I mean, there's a cost to doing that. It's $75,000. That's why I'm asking the question. So this is an internal, something internally that all districts are going to have to incur?
Well, they would be foolish not to, because the new science assessments that are coming in, actually they're being piloted this year, and then next year is the first full year, and this is in grades 5 and 8, and then there will also be a science assessment in the high school in the 11th grade. Will all be based on the new science standards. So you can be assured that across the state, districts are looking at that, and what does that mean with respect to what's being taught.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions so far for the educational operations? I guess you could continue your presentation, Dr. Fieser.
So I'd like now to move into the major areas of savings. We always look for ways in which to offset what we've requested. So under staff reductions, we are reducing 3.0 full-time equivalent teaching positions, and this is in regular education. That's a much lower number than what has been brought before you in the past. I think of a year ago, it was 14 positions. But in truth, for at least this next year, the enrollment decline has really slowed down. It is anticipated that we would decline by approximately 80 students. That's across kindergarten through 12th grade for next year. So the number of positions that would be reduced is far fewer. So that's $180,000 savings. In utilities, we have $71,000, almost $72,000 in savings, and that's primarily due to electricity and natural gas. Actually, the prices being lower than what they had been in the current budget. And the other piece that will begin to yield savings is the solar panels, which as we speak are in the process of beginning to be installed on 4 of the elementary schools. Am I correct?
East Shore and Mathewson are out.
East Shore and Matheson are already completed, and then there's other schools that will be over the summertime. And this is the first phase.
Correct.
Under transportation, we have a savings of $78,600, and there's 4 reasons for that reduction. One is we continue to look ways to consolidate routes, which means there's less demand with respect to how long and how many buses are needed. We changed this year to a 40-minute window between the high school to middle school to elementary, 40 minutes before then the next school set of runs would begin. That's a 10-minute difference, and what that did was enable us to actually use fewer buses to pick up more kids, because we had 40 minutes in which to pick them up and drop them off versus 30 minutes. For the Bridgeport Aquacultural School, we only need 1 bus for next year. We have in the past needed 2 buses, and when those buses are for Bridgeport, that's the only thing they can do. Go to Trumbull, and then come back, pick up the Trumbull kids, and come back. They're unable to do more runs, so that's a cost. So the fact that we are going to be down 1 bus is helpful. And then the last is the decrease in gasoline costs for the buses. So it's a total savings again of $78,600. In other support, there's a savings of just under $100,000. This is due to, again, several things. One is the property liability insurance. Second area is postage, printing, and advertising. And the third is telecommunications, because we finally have, across the entire system, implemented voice over IP, the phone system. So we don't have the costs that we had before. Under educational supplies, $63,000, nearly $500. That's for textbooks, fewer textbooks, and fewer library books. You may be surprised at fewer textbooks. Part of that is it's not as if we're not purchasing textbooks, but in some areas we are moving more toward online resources and using those. For example, in science, I'm going to give the example of the middle schools. There are no textbooks out that they may claim to reflect the next generation science standards, but they don't. So there's a lot of online resources that are being used as opposed to an actual textbook. And then Foreign High School went through the accreditation process this year at a cost of, I believe, $25,000 was in the budget. That's a one-time cost, so that was removed as well. Under equipment, this is just a savings of a little over $100,000 in equipment itself, furniture, and computers. So the total area of savings is just under $600,000 to offset what we requested. On the second page, and then I'll be glad to answer any questions, is just a summary at the top of the page, what the budget was in 2017-18, $91,954,266, and the proposed budget is $93,596,655. The difference is $1.6 million. The percent, again, is a 1.786% increase. So the budget increases down below the historical is laid out there, what was proposed and what was finally adopted, and then there's the graph, which really shows that even though we went up a little bit this year, overall, there's been a significant decline in the budgets over the last 10 years anyways. So with that, we would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Alderman Gurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the board. Thank you for coming tonight. Good to see you all. It's great to see that there's some solar going on the buildings. Is there a cost to that, first of all? I don't know if this is to Pat or Jim.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, through you to Alderman Gurman, no, there's no cost at all to the district. We've entered into what, in effect, is a 20-year lease of the roof space. So the district or the city, the Board of Aldermen actually had to approve the resolution which allowed us to do that. But you are renting the roof space. They're putting the arrays up at their expense, and then we're purchasing the energy that's produced by that solar array at a reduced cost from what we're buying off the grid. And that's how it works. But there's no upfront costs at all to the board or the city.
Thank you. And one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So as far as lighting and LEDs, have those schools been converted over to LEDs as well?
We have an ongoing program in the Board of Education budget. There's a line item for cost-efficient infrastructure and equipment, and each year we're taking advantage of incentives from the utilities and in order to maximize the amount of money. So the board puts in a certain amount of money for LED conversion, we'll say, and then the utilities will give us incentive money on top of that. So we're able to, in some cases, almost double the investment that the board made. But that's an ongoing program of conversion to LED.
And what schools have been completely converted to LED lighting?
I believe we started at Foreign and Law because obviously they're the biggest. Can you?
We're working our way through the buildings now. There's nothing, West Shore is probably the biggest one that we've done with the renovation there, but they're not all 100%. We've been trying to grab as much as we can in the high-end out areas. We just did a bunch of hallways that have a longer run time in the classrooms. So when we grab those dollars, we have enough for the whole building. So that's what we're doing. We did the gym, cabs, all big areas.
Because I know that the cost of LED lighting has come down tremendously and the efficiency has increased significantly, so it's just it's a huge savings. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Beatty.
Just turn this on. I have a question that I perhaps should know the answer to, so I'm going to take the risk and ask it anyway, and maybe somebody else will be enlightened. When you talked about the gifted program and the telescoping cost of the numbers, it would be an added cost for $22,000 for transportation costs, but yet there's a savings of $78,000 in transportation. It's not a matter of your discretion and judgment to move that transportation cost around. It's an existing program. It's not a new program. When you presented it, it almost sounded new. And so isn't there still room there, a net saving for the added transportation costs, just to realign the gifted program. And why,
there's a net
you
savings.
didn't
Correct.
present
I mean,
it
it's
that
a
way.
net savings. I mean, we broke it out. Here's
Yeah.
what we're requesting, here's what we're saving, but it's, the net savings would be that
Still.
$78,000 minus the 22,000. But, you know, they're different line items,
They're
et cetera.
different line items, so you
Right.
can't, so my question then is, do you really need the alderman for that approval within, or can that be done within house? Just
The
from-
22,000?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Which is a shift.
it's a request. It was an increase
Right, to one area.
that was being requested, so we needed approval from the Board of Ed, so it's part of the Board of Education's budget.
If I could just add, the Board of Aldermen looks at our total budget requests, so
Right.
it's part of our total budget. So
Yes.
while we're not looking for approval for that specific increase, as part of our operating budget, we're informing you of the areas where we saw significant increases and the changes that we're requesting. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Giannattasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Being that we're on the subject of transportation, that did kind of stick out to me as well. But I guess my question is going back to the 22,772 for one, it's once a week for one bus. And I don't know how many kids, I know it was 4th and 5th graders gifted. Is that a normal rate? Because that does seem, I don't know, to me, it just seems a little excessive for one bus once a week.
It's actually 2 buses. Mr. Burt can, I'm sorry, is it 4? It's 4 bus runs.
4
Yeah,
runs.
2 buses, 4 bus runs.
Good evening. The way, as Dr. Fieser described it, right now, because of declining enrollment, there's just not enough numbers within each school. We have a gifted program in each school, and even combining 4th and 5th grade, it just isn't going to generate the same collaboration that could possibly happen with larger numbers. So to facilitate that, what we've decided to do is create 2 locations, one for the east side, one for the west side, and we divide those up by day. So on just an example, this isn't set in stone. Tuesday would be 4th grade from the east side, and Wednesday would be 4th grade from the west side. Thursday would be 5th grade from the east side. Friday would be 5th grade from the west side. So that's actually 4 days worth of buses that we're asking for.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
So that would be transporting from schools to one location and then back in the afternoon for 4 days.
Understood, thanks.
Explain why we went with 2 locations?
Yes, the reason we originally, when we went through this proposal, we were thinking one location, but in working with Mr. Riccitelli's office, we realized that for some of the students, it would cut into, having travel. Original proposal was Calf Pen Meadow would be, for the west side of town, would take out about an extra hour per day of their time working together. So we decided on 2 locations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. My initial question is for either Mr. Riccitelli or Mr. Bradbury. I can recall that when we met to talk about the approvals for roof repairs, I remember that meeting taking place within the Board of Ed room. We were meeting there at the time. And I had asked a question about whether you would consider slanted roofs. And I remember that conversation, and then lo and behold, Harborside was built with now with a slanted roof. So I don't know how that's holding up, but I'm glad to see that you are experimenting with that approach. Happy about solar panels on schools, and I wondered, as you're beginning to implement an LED program, whether you would consider changing the location of fixtures for further savings, so as not to just relamp all of the existing fixtures that you already have in place, but think about the additional savings that could come from using LEDs in a much more spare way. So that's one consideration. The second is, I know that there is an initiative underway in the state, the League of Conservation Voters. It's a priority for them. It's also a priority for student groups to get municipalities to be thinking about conversion of their buses to electric buses. And I wondered if you could speak to that. What's the duration of the Durham contract? Have there been discussions held about implementing a cleaner product than what we're using now?
Sure. Thank you, Alderman Anderson, and Mr. Chairman, through you. We're currently in the first year of a 5-year extension with Durham. And so, and the buses are owned by Durham. We have in our contract that no bus can be more than 10 years old, or it has to be replaced. We have passed along the incentives that the state has for conversion of buses to alternate energy supplies. But really, that's kind of a Durham issue at this point, or at least for the duration of this 5-year extension to the contract. In the future, when the time comes, whoever's negotiating with whether it's Durham or whether we're out to bid for buses, that could be one of the considerations that we make as a topic of negotiations for the new contract.
Well, I would think in 5 years' time, it certainly would be a lot more prevalent throughout the municipalities. So, again, I would just suggest that you give further considerations on the LED issue before installation, if you would. Thank you.
We will.
Further, sorry, Mr. Richtelli.
No.
Did you care to respond?
No, I
Okay. Mr. Chairman, an additional question. And this is for Mrs. Glennon or Superintendent. Clearly, the school system is on a trajectory. We've been able to formulate budgets over the last few years in a cooperative way. And the school system has shown considerable improvement. Congratulations to you for bringing that about. My question relates to where we go from here. So there has been a decline in the population over the last, say, 5 years of close to 900 students. I heard the superintendent say that it appears that the decline is going to be somewhat less, projected to be around 80 this next year. I wondered if that was a trend that you were hopeful would continue, or do you consider that a one-year indicator, and what you would attribute that to? Are we seeing more of our students, more of our young people stay within the system as opposed to going into competing schools or systems? Is it because we're experiencing an increase in housing permits? What kind of activity do you attribute that number to?
From my perspective, I don't know if Dr. Fieser would have anything to add, but I think it would be a combination of factors, clearly. I will say that enrollment projections that are done are always based on live births. They don't consider the people that might be moving into a school district or a town. And I think, from my personal opinion, is that that's where the potential lies for Milford. Milford was one of the handful of communities last year that saw an increase in residents. It was, I think, 441 students. It's a modest increase, but it was an increase nonetheless. And I know from my own perspective, from what I hear around town, there are a lot of young adults that are moving into the district with children. And I really can't guess on, I have to assume it's because, we have a good school system, and as I said, that we're doing a good job in this city. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add?
Well, what I would say is that in the last, since I've been here, where the decline really has exhibited itself has been at the elementary. And that's where the bulk of the reduction of staff members has come from, quite honestly, has been from the elementary level. Well, at some point, we knew that was going to start to slow down. And what is happening now is that the larger bubbles of kids that we've had in the district, they're moving up. Like one of the largest ones out of Harborside moved up to the high school this year. Another one will move up to the high school next year. And so we're going to start to see those declines also in the middle school. I mean, we actually have already seen them, but there's declines there. And then in the high school, but the pace has slowed. I agree with Mrs. Glennon. A lot of it is birth rate. You asked whether or not it had to do with the number of students leaving. Say, for example, in 8th grade, the truth of the matter is we've tracked that for the last 10 plus years, and it's declined, which is good news each year. And I'd like to believe that kids are remaining in the Milford Public Schools because the high schools are offering so much more. That they can really compete. We can't compete with some of the magnet schools in New Haven, and we have kids that go to the New Haven magnet schools, for example, in the middle school and the high school, and we have kids in the elementary. But my point is that the St. Joe's and the Notre Dame's and Fairfield Prep and et cetera, we can compete with those schools.
Thank you very much for your responses this evening, and good luck.
Thank you.
Dr. Fieser. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Gurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. I'm going back up to the half custodian increase. So that's a part-time going to full-time, is that correct? Same person?
Yes.
So did they have benefits with a part-time or no?
They do. The part-timer did not have benefits, no.
So go full-time and then full benefits?
Correct.
So what's the full cost of the benefits?
It's very hard, if not impossible, to put a total cost on what the benefits are because the city's self-insured, and it pays claims, not premium. So it's difficult to say exactly what the cost of insurance is. If you took strictly the fully insured rate or the COBRA rate for a single, I think it's probably about $18,000. If it's a family, I think it's probably closer to 25, 26.
It's a little bit less than that for either the allocation rate or the COBRA rate. I think a single is, I'll get the exact numbers, but I think it's 22, 23 for the family rate, and I think it's 17 for a couple. And I think somewhere between 11 and 14 for a single, but I can get you those exact rates.
So just to follow up on that, so a part-time custodian will go from $20,000 a year to a cost of 60, 70, upwards of 100, depending on what happens. So, I always like to see some of that get absorbed into the system. You expand a little bit, you have a little more square footage. Do you really have to hire someone to switch them to full-time and increase that cost that much?
Well, Mr. Bradbury could elaborate, but there's an industry standard. The amount of, and it's a calculation based upon the number of square footage that they're expected to care for, the number of students in the building, the number of staff in the building, and quite honestly, we're adding about a third of the square footage of the building, and it's impossible to expect that the same workforce is going to be able to assume that amount of additional work each day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Tranquilli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Riccitelli. Can you tell us what the rate is that we're getting from the solar company and how much the estimated savings is per year per school or over the course of the 20 to 25-year lease?
At this point, it's, I don't have it here with me, but I can get you the rate that we'll be paying for the solar. We don't know yet exactly what the savings is going to be. We really need a year to get that experience to see, exactly how it pans out. So I think at this point, it's premature to talk about exact dollars or even estimated dollars of savings. We know there's going to be a savings, but we don't know exactly how much. But we definitely can get you the rate.
Alderman Gaynor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The reduction in the teaching positions, is it through attrition or layoff? And also at what level, grammar school, middle school, or high school?
Well, we've been fortunate that over the years, almost all of the positions have been able to be handled through attrition. That's the expectation this year. But we haven't actually finalized which positions. We don't finalize that, and quite honestly, until we know what the budget is. Okay.
Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Jim, and maybe you or Pat, I could remember sitting on the Permanent Schools Committee for many years at this point. We just put new roofs on buildings, and we were promised, I think we were promised, that the integrity of the new roofs would not be compromised by the solar panels. Is that still in effect?
It is. Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is it is. Any damage that's done while the solar panels are being installed wouldn't be the responsibility of the warranty, but it would be the responsibility of the solar developer, who's responsible for any damage to the roof. But the solar panels themselves will not cause any problems with the integrity of the roof. That has to be, the engineering was done beforehand, and it has to be signed off before the solar installations are finished by a licensed engineer, and the warranty won't be affected except in a case where damage was actually done to the roof because of the installation. But that responsibility would be the solar developer and not the district.
Thank you. And I would only hope that none of the air handlers or anything on top, any equipment on the building, does not have to be moved in order to make room for the panels. That's my assumption. That's correct.
That's correct.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chair. Declining enrollment. Obviously, declining enrollment drives budget, we thought. And a lot of the questions in prior years was the fact that we're declining in enrollment and budget is going up. So I don't know how that has a converse effect there. No, I'm sure no Board of Education member would like to see a school close in their district. Having said that, there are, 8 elementary schools, and 6 out of the 8 elementary schools are below 300 kids. There's got to be some thought process in the future of reorganizing, closing schools. I'm just hoping, and as I said this before, that no, we're not improving on schools. We're not improving on schools, that in 2 or 3 years, or 2 years, or next year, or something like this, when we have a new superintendent and whatever, where there might be a different concept, that we're going to be giving away these schools or selling these schools off, having all the improvements done, because it's been a big chunk of money out of our pockets at that point. So I don't know if that's a rhetorical question. I don't know if you want to answer that, but I know that's been my question for the last few years as to what is the thought process behind the idea of schools being under 300 kids and having a fully staffed, fully administered building. So you can answer that if that takes a question or an answer. The other question is that I'd like, and I think it's a short question, a short answer, is that the budget was cut $361,500, I believe, by Board of Finance. Can you live with that cut?
Thank you. I'll reiterate what I said in my opening remarks, that the $361,500 was intended to fund the second priority for each building, and that this board feels that we just should be more aggressive with attention to our infrastructure. I said, can the projects be put off? The second priority projects, yes, of course they can be put off. Otherwise, they would have been a first priority this year. But that doesn't mean to say that they'll definitely be done next year or the year after, because there's always going to be priorities that crop up. And so the question becomes, what commitment do we want to make to our infrastructure? And as new families come into Milford, we want them to go into beautiful school buildings where the classrooms are inviting and pleasant and bright, and the cubbies are safe and they look nice. So this is what we're talking about.
Good. I thank you for that, because as you look at the projects 1 and 2, that any of the important projects are being done on the basis of remodeling at this point, not knowing where we're going at this point with declining enrollment. And the fact is, I don't see any of these projects as being that is so concerned with schools' integrity or going to be compromised at all. We've always gone through budgets, and we've always gone through projects with a priority, a list of priorities. And at one point, whether you needed a parking lot repaved, whether you need something. But so I would take it that your explanation at this point is not the gravity of the $360,000+. That obviously this budget is going forward, and there won't be any compromise to instruction or anything else as far as even with buildings at this particular point in time. Is that true?
Alderman Vitale, if I could elaborate on what Mrs. Glennon talked about. I think it's important for the members of the board to understand that on this priority list for buildings and grounds projects, we're talking about priority number 1 and number 2. But there's a list of more than 10 priorities for every school. In total, all the priorities for the building projects were $2.8 million. But in your budget, the request is only roughly $600,000. So we're barely scratching the surface of the things that need to be done in the schools. Not frills, not things that are elaborate, but things that need to be fixed, things that need to be kept up with. As we've said, and as we know, our buildings are old, but they're very well maintained. But if we keep falling behind by only doing priority number 1 or priority number 2, when there's priority number 10, 11, and 12 at each school, we're going to continue to fall behind. So our buildings are aging, but they're very effective, good schools, clean, safe schools, because we're able to put enough money into them each year to keep up with the projects. And so it's $2.8 million for building projects that are on that list. Only $600,000 is in your budget. And on the grounds projects, it's $2.1 million worth of priorities, and there's roughly only $400,000 in your budget. So the board is not asking for elaborate things. They're asking for maintenance projects that need to be done, things that need to be fixed to keep our schools running safely.
And I appreciate that, I really do. And as Mrs. Glennon had indicated before, we take care of the little things, and sometimes the big things get taken care of. But again, the big question, they build 500-pound gorilla in the room, is that we have 6 out of 8 elementary schools below 300 kids. 6 out of the 8 below 300 kids. And so is there a plan? So why would I think about putting that kind of money into schools that I'm not sure are going to exist the next year or two. That's my particular concern. Thank you.
Alderman Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. I guess just a clarification on the second priority, because I noticed that in Appendix I, the first page has building projects, where each school has listed, 1 and then 2. The grounds projects, I mean, some are listed twice, some are listed once. Which, is it the building projects that wouldn't be done?
Correct.
Okay, so the grounds projects are separate from?
Well, yeah, they're two separate line items, and the board's direction was to increase the funding only for the buildings projects.
Okay, so as it stands, the grounds projects would be completed, the building projects, the second priority would not be completed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Alderman Tranquilli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, just one more question. The school resource officer, and maybe I missed it earlier, if the budget is cut to $361,000, will that extra school resource officer still be added?
Our part of the funding would remain, yes, correct.
Alderman Vecchiarelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. I see where the Board of Finance has recommended a $361,500 cut. And, well, I'm not exactly sure what the reasons were for cutting, but I'm looking at the presentation that you gave us tonight, and when I look at the building projects under your major budget request, it almost mirrors like what the Board of Finance has cut you. Yeah, I'm wondering, did they feel that maybe this was an area that they felt they could cut you? I don't know, but I understand, Mr. Riccitelli, what you're saying, and as I look through this, it looks like a very responsible list of things that are not always readily thought of and available and of major interest, maybe to the taxpayer, but it is of concern because they are our properties, and when you look at the stuff that you have here, it all makes very good sense that these are things that do need to be replaced and is responsible to put them in here. And it's nice that I'm able to see these things and some of the costs that are with them so that we have a better idea of what it is that we're funding. And it just makes it much easier for me to understand and say, this is money that would be well spent. But what I wanted to ask is, on the first page that was handed out, it was major budget requests, which I assume is, they're all in the book, and it's saying basically $710,000. And then the area of savings of almost $600,000. But it's, so if the math, if we subtract one from the other, we come up with $113,000, almost $114,000. My question is, what would that, if we were to restore $114,000 to your budget, what does that represent on this paper here? I mean, I'm just having a little bit of a hard time understanding your budget request, what the finance board did, and then trying to fit this paper into all of that. Okay, so But I know that there's a difference of about $114,000. So if you could help me understand that.
Sure. Thank you, Alderman Vecchiarelli. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The sheet that we gave you tonight is really only an example of the major requests that we've made, the major, what I guess we would call the priorities of the district are for this year. And then we pointed out some of the areas, some of the major areas that we found savings. So this sheet is not intended to subtract one from the other. This is just an example of what's contained, the major priorities of the board, major requests of the board, versus where we've been able to find savings to help offset some of those requests. So I would caution against just taking one and subtracting the other, because there's many other costs in the budget. The cost of wages, all wages have gone up. We have contractual obligations. They haven't gone up by a lot, but there's additional costs in the budget beyond what's on this sheet. Just like there's additional savings in the budget that are not on the sheet, but we wanted to point out to you those major areas. So again, I caution, don't subtract one from the other from this sheet. With regard to the decrease that the Board of Finance made, it was proportional to the amount of money that the Board of Education added to the superintendent's proposed budget. I can't sit here and tell you that, what the rationale was for the Board of Finance cutting that, but it's exactly proportional. They cut $361,500, which is what the Board of Ed put into that budget. So you can read into it what you want. But we're, administration and the Board of Education is asking you to restore that $361,500 to reflect what the district needs and what the district board's priorities are.
And
I hope that makes it a little clearer.
And that $360,000, would that take care of a lot of the priority twos?
All of them. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions from the board for the education? Alderman Giannattasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. My question is to whoever on the panel wants to answer is, what other district do you compare us to? What's the closest surrounding city or town that you feel is a close comparison to the Milford Board of Education?
With respect to performance indicators, for example?
No, not performance, I'm sorry. More or less, population, facilities.
So Shelton would be one, Wallingford would be another, Southington would be another. New Milford, but I'm not sure population-wise that they're equivalent.
And they have the same structure that we have as far as the different levels of schools and...
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know that, for example, Shelton only has one high school, whereas we have two. Southington only has one high school, we have two. Wallingford has two high schools. So we don't compare necessarily to look exact number of schools because we can't, there would be very, very few. But it's more, economic factors with respect to free and reduced lunch students, for example. We also look at, how large is the school system? So there's some equivalence there. It's those kinds of indicators. But if there was, for example, if you were to say, well, do you look at transportation systems? Well, they may not look at those four towns. They may look at some other towns. Or, security upgrades, et cetera. That may vary tremendously. We choose those primarily in terms of school districts that we compare ourselves against on performance indicators.
Okay, you mentioned economics. Can you share with the board, do you currently know what the educational cost is in Milford per student? And
Yes, it's actually in the budget book.
It's in your budget book.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, through you, is there how does that compare to Shelton, Wallingford, and these other surrounding districts that you mentioned?
To answer your first question, Alderman Gennatasio, that information can be found on page A18, which is Appendix F. And the per pupil expenditure is $20,574. I don't have comparisons to other school districts as to what theirs are. I just don't have those.
And if this budget before us is adopted, would that number remain the same, more or less?
No, it would increase. The budget is going up slightly, but there's also declining students. So when you're taking more dollars and dividing it by less students, it's going to go up.
Okay.
But you can see, if you look on that page, you can see the trend and the percentages each year of how the the per pupil expenditure cost has gone up.
And along with what drives this number, other than, I know the wages consistently increase, is the infrastructure and the updates for the facilities as well.
Well, also in your budget, in the executive summary in the front, you can see the bar charts. So roughly 76% of the budget is wages and salaries and benefits. So that's a big number. That's really what drives the budget each year is, the wages and how much the wages go up. And then there's, everything else that fits into it too. But wages is primarily what drives the budget.
Right. Just for, discussion purposes, informational purposes, I would just like to know, maybe at least one other district, what that cost per student is, to see how we measure up. But thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Alderman Gurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the board again. So you're asking for $93.5 million is the proposed budget, so that's a 1.7% increase. What's not on there, and this is more for the new people on the board, is the health insurance contribution that the city pays for on behalf of the Board of Education, which is $19.2 million. So total cost, or total budget you're asking for is $112,500,000. You also have in your booklet that the health insurance costs may increase 8 to 10% next year. Can you justify that, and also maybe share with me any thoughts on improving healthcare costs, maybe?
Sure. Alderman Gurman, through you, Mr. Chairman, one thing that I would point out is the dollar amount for health insurance that's attributable to the Board of Ed is the number that you've quoted from the city budget. But I would also point out that on Appendix G in our budget, we give you the dollar amount that our employees contribute. So it's certainly not proportional, but it's about 3.6, and that was in the 16-17 school year. So we're probably close to $4 million that Board of Education employees contribute through their premium cost share to the city's health insurance fund. But it's still a tremendous amount of money. The one thing that I'll tell you that we are working aggressively on is through our negotiation process. The traditional PPO plan that has traditionally been the public sector health insurance plans. That's something that we are not so slowly, aggressively phasing out. We're moving now to high deductible health plans or health savings account plans. In all of our contracts, we have that it's mandatory for new employees to go onto the HDHP plan, and in some of our contracts that have been approved up to till now, the cost of the traditional PPO is becoming so much more expensive for the employee that there's a great incentive for them to move to the HDHP. And that, in the long run, is going to save a lot of money in the health insurance. It's just it's a much more affordable plan, and we are aggressively. I would venture to say that within 4 to 5 years, a great majority of Board of Education employees will be off the traditional PPO and onto the HDHP, which, again, in the long run is going to greatly enhance the savings in the health insurance accounts.
It's terrific, thank you. You're welcome.
Any more questions from the board for the educational operations? I see none. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming tonight and answering all our questions. And I guess we're going to be saying goodbye to Dr. Fieser and Mr. Burt. Thank you all for all the work that you have done for the school system and for the city of Milford and all our students. I think we've come a long way with our population of our kids coming out of the schools are much better than they have been in previous years. So my hat's off to you and good luck in your future. Thank you very much again for coming out tonight.
Much better. Well, schools are much better today. Michael, you think? Look at the caliber of person we produced years ago. In this city that I'm sitting in.
Is there a motion to recess?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Our next budget meeting will be the voting night, which will be Tuesday night, May 22nd, 2018. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Janice,
Opposed?
here. Nobody's second.
We're in recess.
Taking donations from Mike. I sent him, I ordered the flowers. Okay. It's gonna be $10 a piece. Do you have 10?
How's he doing?
I saw him today.
Oh, you went there?
Yeah, he's actually at Gaylord in Wallingford.
Let me get back to you on that, Alderman Genatasio.
Okay, thank you.
We also have a number of people in that division that are out on